Hello, everybody. Hi, Talana. Hi, Ray J. Yes, I'm wearing the infamous dress again. I don't care. So, are you ready to read a book? Everyone get a drink, sit down. I got some mineral water ready to go. I don't know why I like mineral water so much. We'll wait a few minutes for everyone to get here. I bet you we can read. Oh, it's not put in chapters necessarily. I bet you we could read 1 through 50 today. 1 through 65, I bet. I am a pretty good reader. I'll try to read slow, but with passion. Passion. We'll wait a minute for everyone to get here. Oh my god, I hate seeing my face on the screen. Did you guys notice that you put a little watermark here? The one that Ellis made me? How cute's that? How cute. Who else is here today? Let me see. Who is all here? Thank you. Hi, Stony. I know it's my summer dress. It's. I wanted to cover up the fact that I wasn't wearing a bra, so I wore the puffiest thing that I had. Okay, so let's start. I will start with the preface. Preface? Can you guys all hear me okay? Shelby. Can you guys hear me all right? Let me see. Okay. So the preface, or however you pronounce it. This book is about atrocity, what it looks like, what it feels like, what causes it, and how we might stop it. The story began when I traveled with the photographer Adam Nadal to Japan to interview a group of war criminals from the Second Sino-Japanese War. Just in case you guys don't know what Sino-Japanese means, Sino means kind of like inspired by Chinese, so Chinese and Japanese, so Sino-Japanese kind of thing. There was 2 Sino-Japanese wars. The second one was actually between 1937 and 1945. So again and frail when I met him, many in their 80s. When I met them, many in their 80s, they had done the worst things imaginable as young men. All of them had eventually been captured and held for a decade in prison camps. They showed me pictures of themselves from the war years, faded black and white snapshots of young men in uniform, faces proud or scared, fierce or boyish. Looking at their younger selves, they told me they saw emptiness. They saw demons. I have been involved in the human rights community for many years, but before this had never worked with perpetrators. I wasn't ready for how disorienting it would be, how startling to find myself over time, beginning to see the world through their eyes. The style and structure of this book are designed to share their experience with you. This book isn't just about the things war criminals do. It is about what it's like to befriend them. In this preface, I develop a cluster of questions about what it means for us today that these evils happened and, perhaps more important, that they continue to happen. The questions are also a conceptual map of the book. The flow of the pages that follow simulates the visual flow of a photographer searching zoom lens, broadly framing a scene, closing in slowly on a field of visual details, zooming back out again to see the larger setting afresh. The details now lost in the expanding focus, but still vivid, like the visual imprint of sunlight gazed upon too long, then zooming back in again on another site of concern. As I proceed through the book's questions, I will highlight some of the paradoxes inherent to them. The poet John Keats, in a different context, talks about negative capability, the capacity to experience uncertainty, mystery, and doubt, and to remain open to them, to resist the impulse to reduce everything to familiar terms and categories that we can control. Negative capability allows us to experience paradox and its cousin in the realm of form, juxtaposition, as a way of opening questions and sometimes meanings where no words are. Hi, Susan. Hi, Phil, Charlotte, Shirley. I am Ned. 1. To begin, what is at stake ethically in the writing and reading this book? How can we look at violently invasive and traumatic events with respect and care rather than sensational curiosity? Which I think is a very important point. Because, like, when I brought up with the Junko Furuta thing, what am I really doing to this world? I bring it up and sensationalizing everybody's curiosity and bringing the terrible things. What are we getting out of it? How do profoundly private injuries fit into our merciless public spaces? At the center of the answers to these questions is a single structuring paradox, the paradox of trauma. We are morally obligated to represent trauma, but we are also morally obligated not to. 2. If we are going to move forward together with these shocking stories, what use can we make of them? Can they help us answer questions like this? How do societies turn normal men into monsters? With more focus, what is the individual's psychological process and felt experience of becoming a monster? With yet more focus, given that these monsters are often men, what role does gender play in genocidal violence? Here, too, the answer revolves around key paradoxes, including the paradox of evil. Evil is demonic and other. It is also banal and common to us all. And the paradox of agency and responsibility. We are free and self-determining. We are also products of circumstance. 3. Zooming back out, how does the outrageous suffering we see affect our comprehensive vision of being in the world, our big picture beliefs, our hopes for human future, our final optimism or pessimism, our thoughts on altruism, transcendence, and even the divine? Some of the familiar paradoxes here include the paradox of altruism. Altruism involves the sacrifice of our interests to benefit others. It also involves the satisfaction of our interests through benefiting others. The paradox of nihilism. To find our meaning, we must face our meaninglessness. And the characteristically Christian version of the paradox of evil. How could God be both, I can't pronounce this word. How could God be both omnipotent and good and still permit evil? 4. After such cruelty that not only shocks our conscience but also destabilizes our understanding of the world, is apology possible? How can individuals or nations expect forgiveness for crimes beyond thinking? And how can they confess truthfully when memory is frail, self-protective, and self-starving? When history itself is tissued with lies? Indeed, what place is there for truth at all in war, torture, and confession? Thinking through this range of related questions will require continually returning to the paradox of confession. Confession is a healing cultural form that we need. It is also a potentially damaging one. Finally, to end where we began, confessions like these are stories and their own particular ethics. What are the ethics of storytelling more generally? It is here for me that the most personally difficult paradox presses. The paradox of writing. To write about other people's private lives, you must develop respectful, intimate relations with them. But to write about other people's private lives, you must also treat them impersonally as characters to be constructed, manipulated, and displayed. Many people do the difficult work of writing and reading stories of suffering because they believe that it promotes human dignity to do so. Another interesting point. How is bringing stories of horrible things like we do like I've done on my channel and others, promote human dignity and, good moral ethics? How does that work? Storytelling is not only the most basic work of human rights advocacy, it is the most basic work of human empathy. But do the stories we tell make a difference? What kind of difference? When we look at violently invasive and traumatic events, is it really possible to do so with respect and care rather than sensational curiosity? What will happen when you read this book? Sorry, I'm taking a note. Sensational curiosity. That is interesting. Now we will start. Evil Men. So, are you guys all intrigued so far? There's 16 people here. So, do you miss your old war buddies? The people you were with until the end of the war? Interviewee. Oh, yeah, I miss them. Most of them were, like brothers. Really. They were really like your family. I'd imagine so. Interview. Interviewee. We've been through life or death struggles together, you know? It's more than what you've been through with your own brothers. I do miss those guys, of course. So, would it help if I said, like, um, interviewee before I start or how would it help you guys to know? Because this, like, here it shows, like, italicized, not italicized. I'll just say interviewee. That would help, right? Okay. Each time I had the interviewee a small sachet of wild rice from Minnesota. Wait. Each time I hand the interviewee a small sachet of wild rice from Minnesota. Each time I begin with awkward, repetitive half bows and the same joke about how I cannot properly pronounce "I'm glad to meet you" or even "thank you." They smile and I can tell they are surprised to be smiling. And I think it's good that I start each time from weakness. In the morning, the photographer I get coffee. Wait, blah. In the morning, the photographer and I get coffee and pastries outside our hotel. In the evening, the interpreter takes us out for fun to kabuki, to a martial arts expedition, to the best and expensive sushi, to her favorite old bar. The three of us talk about everything but the men. So, what's really interesting about this book, it's been a while since I've read it. Like he's gonna be talking about his trip to Japan and then he's gonna throw in like an anecdote in there from the interviewee. So I'm gonna try to figure out how to do this. I wish I could. I'll just make it as better. Okay. So we're breaking off into an excerpt from one of the war criminals. Why was I able to do these sort of things? Even I don't understand that. I'm a farming man after all, I thought. A man from a farming family. I thought that afterwards. That's how you feel in the end, you know? I'm not a man who would do something like that. So these men would come back and not even believe some of the things that they've done. Could somebody be forced through order? It's interesting. Could you be forced through orders to do something so incomprehensible that when you got back to your normal life that you can't believe you've done it? Or why would you even do it? Okay, back to the story. I've never seen a professional fight until tonight. Some of the martial arts displays have been gentle liquid dances, but this one is a fight. It will be over soon. One man is winning now. He is holding. Hold on. I'm trying to think of the best way to read this for you. You know what? Found it. So we're just going to start here. We're going to skip a little forward. Gotcha. So here's the first story. The first story is about a gentleman that he interviewed. It looks like his name is Sakakura-san. So this is going to be entirely his story. This is the first one. And then it breaks down what is what. So let's go. Sakakura-san. But then suddenly from the village, a group of 15, 16 people jumped out. And at that time, I have never seen the 8th Route Army, the primarily military force of the Communist Party of China. That's what the 8th Route Army is. What our enemies looked like before. And I couldn't know what sort of people these were. So I quickly dropped down on my stomach because lots of people had come out. And then the general said, fire. He said, shoot them all. And so I shot too. The bullet I fired hit. It actually hit, I thought. And most of the people, they dropped like flies, you know. After they went down, then there was a sorghum field. It was right in the middle of June, so it was big. The sorghum had grown up to here, and everyone fell into that or ran into it, all sorts of things. I ran right after them, and where I went in the sorghum field, there was a collapsed person. I looked at it. I looked, and it was a housewife. The housewife, she had fallen over dead, and I thought, okay, a housewife, nothing I can do about that. I thought, I started to go, and from under the housewife's arm, there was a small baby. You see, a small baby stuck his head out and his hand. Well, he was touching the woman's breast, looking for them, touched them, and then he looked at my face and he smiled at me. And this really shocked me. After that, I found I couldn't really walk, And then more than scared it was, I felt a shiver up my spine. And then, although I tried to go, I couldn't walk. And really, the older soldiers came in from behind me, came in. We were being chased. Run away, they said. And then I left it just like that. We ran away, and then, so after that, I thought about it. That child, with nobody around, would just die like that. I thought, and that was the most of the war, my actions. For the first time, that sort of, to me, disgusting sort of feeling, that feeling really hit me, So that's one thing that happened. So Sakakura-san is basically talking about how they were chasing soldiers and he left a baby to die in a field. That is the middle of Sakakura-san's story. When it begins, he is a civilian. When he ends, he is a perpetrator. At the time Sakakura-san told me about the baby, he was near death, and he was trying to make sense of his life. He had spent many years in prison camp and many more years in social exile, examining the things he had done and the things done to him. He had committed atrocities, caused incalculable suffering, but he had also experienced trauma. Indeed, he had experienced his own crimes as trauma. He felt the closeness of death now, he said, like a kind of pressure. I don't have a future. If I don't hurry up and talk now, if I die, there will be nobody to tell these stories. Sakakura-san and other veterans I interviewed constituted a distinct group. They were all former members of the Chukurin, an association of anti-war veterans that had worked for 45 years to draw attention to the imperial Japanese war crimes and to promote friendship between Japan and China. They represented a group of approximately 1,100 Japanese soldiers who had been imprisoned by the Soviet Union after the war and then extradited years later to Fushun prison in China. The Siberian prisons were inhumanely brutal. Fushun prison was disorienting in its near complete contrast. Chinese staff there were instructed to receive their prisoners like guests. This is something interesting. The Chinese, even though the Japanese did the worst crimes on Chinese civilians, like literally, like when we talk about Nanjing, they went in and they rape and sexually assaulted up to 80,000 women in that 6-week period. When the Japanese soldiers were shipped back to prisons from the Siberia, Soviet Union area, back to China, they treated them like human beings and like they were guests, because it's very shocking to me that they could do this, to be honest. So this is where they're going to be talking about that. Chinese staff there were instructed to receive their prisoners like guests, treating them with respect, feeding them well, attending to their medical needs, and organizing sporting and cultural activities for them. The prisoners also underwent thought reform. After time, they experienced something like a religious conversion. They repudiated the values of their past, indeed repudiated their past selves, and committed themselves to lives of almost evangelical pacifism. The veterans now describe this transformation as the miracle of Fushun. In 1956, military tribunals were finally held for the men. 45 were indicted. All were eventually freed. So, like the Chinese are really good at, they did like a complete reform, because that fascinates me, to be honest. That's an interesting topic to look into. Fushun prison, the miracle of Fushun. Because some of the pictures I'm looking for, looking through, and what we're going to be doing, I'm going to be done with this. What is it? The non-Kane video in like 2 weeks, not even 2 weeks. But I've seen pictures of Japanese soldiers throwing newborn babies up into the air and then putting their bayonets through them. I seen women with half-naked women on the streets with their heads cut off and bayonets shoved in their private parts. They really didn't give. They gave 0 Fs, but the fact that the Chinese took in the prisoners like that and freed them is crazy. In 1957, these returnees established a formal organization in Japan to support each other in their efforts to end the silence about imperial Japanese war crimes. Largely scorned or ignored by their public and mainstream media, they nonetheless continued their activism until 2002, when age-related health problems made it impossible for most members to carry on. The Chukurin Peace Memorial Museum was established in Saitama Prefecture shortly after by a new generation of activists. Housing over 20,000 books with related video and photographs, it is a warren of bookshelves and seminar tables, more of a resource center and a library than a museum. It was here that we were first introduced to the soldiers. From the start, it seemed to me that these men saw themselves as products of history. They embraced blame, but as part of context that exceeded them. After World War I, Japan emerged as the dominant military force in Asia. The increasingly militarized country, organized under the rule of the divine emperor, was anxious to assert its power and to resist the pressures of Western imperialism. But to secure its regional I can never say this word, hegemony, Japan needed to control resources in China. The result was a catastrophic race between Chinese reunification and Japanese expansion in China. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria and set up the puppet state of Manchukuo. Full-scale war began 6 years later after a minor military engagement at Marco Polo Bridge. Japan narrated the ensuing conflicts and all of its war crimes as a matter of racial glory and destiny. Ooh, that's a good sign. A government report compiled in 1943 presented Japanese territorial ambitions as proto-humanitarian interventions. So they were trying to justify their war crimes. All of this stuff, invading and killing all the civilians, the children, the elderly, mass rape, mass genocide, was all so they could take over land. And it was humanitarian interventions. And it doesn't make any sense. So in order to stop Western imperialism, it just made complete sense for Japan to like throw out Japanese imperialism with mass violence. It makes no sense. We, the Yamamoto race, are presently spilling our blood to realize our mission in world history of establishing a greater Asia co-prosperity, which we call Pan-Asianism, in order to liberate the billion people of Asia and also to maintain our position of leadership over the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere forever. We must plant the blood of the Yamamoto race in this soil. Yamamoto race. So Japan said that the Japanese people were superior than every other Asian race in Asia, and they were to colonize all of Asia, basically. And that they were like spouting this friendship spear that's Pan-Asianism. Religious justifications echoed imperial ones. Even Zen scholars joined in, publishing arguments that China had failed as a nation in its understanding of Buddhism and needed to be saved from itself. Which is funny because Buddhism actually came from China and then during the Kamakura period traveled from Korea to Japan. It's called cultural borrowing. Japan got a lot of its stuff from China. So, what was that? Sorry, my kids are in the bedroom. Understanding of Buddhism and needed to be saved from itself. Through Japan's superior spiritual understanding, China would find its unreasonableness corrected. Through a compassionate war, the warring nations are able to improve themselves, and war is able to exterminate itself. I am wearing the dress. Yeah, it's a way of, there should be no people killed. The context is what the Chukurin wanted to emphasize to me. As an American U.S. forces were occupying Iraq as we spoke, there's always a context. Atrocity both requires and resists representation. The argument that we must bear witness to atrocity, that we must tell the stories, is the core of the catechism of the human rights movement. We gather testimony, we investigate the detailed war crimes because we are morally bound to do so. Our obligation is acutely urgent in cases where legal prosecution is a realistic possibility, but it is also a powerful law after the call for trials has faded into history, especially when there is a robust practice of denial and historical revisions, as there is in Japan. And when we look at Nanking, I'm also going to be reading a book where it talks about how Japan views their own war crimes. It's insane. We are creating a collective moral archive of our time for future generations. We are making public history intelligible to survivors who have seen their deepest personal truths denied daily. And sometimes, as the soldiers they spoke to believed, we are using the safe to imagine past as a way of making visible what we are doing in the present. Thank you. In recent decades, Japanese government officials, scholars, and former military officers of all ranks have denied and downplayed the atrocities committed by Imperial Japan. In 1994, Minister of Justice Shigeto Nagano described the 1937 Nanking massacre, in which an estimated 300 civilians were murdered, as a fabrication. The Minister of Justice of the country said that it was a fabrication. It's terrible. If you've seen some of the pictures that I've seen, it's terrible. Not a fabrication. In the carefully worked apology that followed, he continually referred to the Nanking incident. In 2007, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe denied the Korean women were coerced into becoming military sex slaves. Sorry, I'm so emotional. Shinzo Abe, whose great-great-grandfather was the first Prime Minister of Japan after World War II, who had ties with people that did Unit 731 and land in Manchuria in 2007, which is not that long ago, was still denying that Korean women were coerced into becoming comfort women. They were. Thank you, Andreas. In 2001, the Ministry of Education approved for use of revisionist school history textbooks that glossed over war crimes, including the Nanking Massacre, the widespread use of sex slaves, and experimentation with germ warfare on Chinese civilians. So in Japanese textbooks, they have no mention of Unit 731, no mention of the Nanking Massacre, nothing at all. It's completely gone. Look, I got goosebumps. I'm so pissed off. In 2005, a book by a Japanese scholar was translated into English and personally sent to me by the publisher that lambasted the late author Iris Chain for perpetuating the myth of massacres having been perpetrated in Nanking. The list could go on. If Eli Wiesel is right in saying that to forget is to kill twice, then the Second Sino-Japanese War never ended. It just shifted to the landscape of memory. Ooh, that is a very powerful. Let me read that again. This is a very powerful statement. If Eli Wiesel is right in saying that to forget is to kill twice, then the Second Sino-Japanese War never ended. It just shifted to the landscape of memory. So all of us, the photographer, the interpreter, and I, began this project with the same assumption: bearing witness to atrocity in this case and in general is good unto itself, whether it's telling the story of the crime as it's happening or collecting and sharing the testimony years later as we're doing. The struggle for human rights and the battle of memory requires a single clear moral position. Either speak out or be silent. Either resist or be complicit. I'm not too sure anymore. It's okay, India. There is a paradox to representing suffering. To stop people from being injured, we have to tell the story of what's happening. But in telling the story, we can injure people in unexpected ways. We hope to shame perpetrators into moral obedience. but sometimes incite them into further violence. We hope to elicit compassion from spectators, but sometimes further further their desensitization or even generate disgust. We hope to give therapeutic voice to survivors, but sometimes re-traumatize them. We hope to turn distant strangers into vivid, intimately felt persons, but sometimes only trap them into abstract, two-dimensional identity of a victim. Which is so true. Once you get into that role as a victim, it's really hard to get other people to view you outside of the victim role. I see now that there is corollary for belated testimony, for representing suffering distant not only in a place but also in time. Gathering evidence is an act of respect to survivors and to the dead, and it is small but real verbal bulwark against the repetition of mass atrocity. And so we will again and again say, never again. But gathering and sharing evidence triggers chains of consequences we cannot control. It, too, causes harm. Over the course of this project, I began to believe that the work of collecting perpetrator testimony requires moral myopia, perhaps even arrogance. To me, there seemed to be no other way to make it through the thicket of questions the work poses. What is at stake in telling the perpetrator's stories when the victims cannot tell theirs? When does listening to it and recording a plea for forgiveness become a silent promise of forgiveness? A forgiveness you have no right to bestow or deny. And what is your motivation for doing the work? The call of responsibility to the other, the narcissism of moral righteousness, or the writer's desire for sensational material? It is showing the most vicious and crude details and exercise in the pornography of evil, or is the failing to do so moral cowardice? If you self-censor, are you protecting trauma from representation, from invasive starring, simplification, dissection, or are you ignoring trauma's cry for representation and reenacting the bystander avoidance that makes such cruelties possible in the first place? Oh, man. That is a really powerful, that's a really packed little part there. Because if you think, like, what good are we doing telling all of these people's stories on YouTube that have suffered so much? Like, we're desensitizing the viewers. We don't give the people that need to have their stories told, but then we're also re-traumatizing them and putting them into a role of victim. It's crazy. Emmanuel Douglas is the author of Johnny Mad Dog, a novel about a child soldier in the Congolese Civil War. Dongla was himself a refugee from the war, saved from likely death by a group of humanitarian workers. Dongla knew the only reason the humanitarian workers had been able to reach him was because they had been able to raise money and gain access by revealing dramatic stories like this, like his suffering in Congo. He knew in the moment of his rescue that he was trading his story for his life. But when we spoke about it, he told me he was also painfully aware of the dehumanizing quality of just such storytelling. Dehumanizing quality of such storytelling. So as us YouTubers that, like, show, like, what is the true crime enthusiasts, like, are we really making people put out, like, dehumanizing stories, or are we just desensitized? Like, what do we really do? What do we really do? Like, are we just, like, all part of this cycle? It kind of makes you think. Dehumanizing quality of such storytelling. Aware that the price of each such rescue was a solidification of the imagery of the suffering African, the African whose natural state is suffering. It was only that such images contributed to the racist logical manifest. For instance, Francois's Mitterrand's infamous comment about Rwanda. In countries like that, genocide is not very important. It was also that such storytelling involved a kind of theft, not unlike the theft of war looting itself. As the young African woman insists in Dongla's novel, in response to a plea from Western journalists to film her dying mother, Mama Mama's stumps were our suffering, our pain. We had the right to keep it private. Susan Satan has written extensively about the ethical problems of atrocity photography, about our desire to take pictures of the dying and our desire later to gaze upon the images. She concludes, one can feel obliged to look at photographs that record great cruelties and crimes. One should feel obliged to think about what it means to look at them, about the capacity actually to assimilate what they show. Not all reactions to these pictures are under the supervision of reasons and conscience. Most depictions of tormented, mutilated bodies do arouse a prudent interest. All images that display the violation of the attractive body are, to a certain degree, pornographic. But images of the repulsive can also allure. Everyone knows that what slows down highway traffic going past a horrendous car crash is not only curiosity, it is also, for many, the wish to see something gruesome. Calling such wishes morbid suggests a rare there we go. Sorry. Suggests a rare aberration, but the attraction to such sights is not rare and is a perennial source of inner torment. Our I'm just going to. I froze hardcore. I'm frozen. Okay, cool. I'm going to keep going. I like how he's making us. Like, he kind of feels bad after doing this. Okay. Why? Okay, we're going to keep going. Our enjoyment, or rather the fear of our capacity for enjoyment, is indeed a torment. But what about the problem of enjoyment on the other side of the camera? What about perpetrators who are not hiding from the cameras, but performing for them? Human rights workers who use exposure as an intervention technique face difficult questions about its effectiveness. What is the point of seeing if we cannot act on what we see? What if seeing promotes story fatigue rather than action? More troubling, they are also faced questions about whether exposure as intervention might be a service to perpetrators. As Thomas Keenan writes, mobilizing shame in a shameless world would just be a kind of perverse publicity work. That is a great thing. So when we think about exposing predators, for instance, if there was really something like, I'm like trying to put this in a context, like if we're talking about something like Twitter allowing predators to do whatnot, like that's like a grand scale. Now, if we go to the micro, like if we're looking about individual predators, how is waiting to get all of your evidence and putting decoys out there when you fair know that this person is already a predator, and then waiting to edit a video, putting it out, promoting it, you're letting somebody else be abused possibly, so and you're just giving them more publicity. So like it's perverse publicity work. I think that's a great point. So like if that makes sense, that's going to be my example to that. Not that I don't think that that people on YouTube that do that, you know, like they have good intentions, that their intentions aren't good. But I'm thinking like if you put as much work into actually handing over evidence to people that can do something, and then if they don't do something, then yeah, do the work. But I mean, holding on to evidence and then this kind of work online, like that people do, like the pedophile hunter people, like it's like you want to get your bit of the pie before, I don't know. You guys know what I'm saying? Such problems might be insoluble, but we have no other choice than to live in the possibility of their solution. In his novel, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, a magistral account of atrocity and memory in the Second Sino-Japanese War, Haruki Murakami presents a poignant model of personal narration as counterspell to meaninglessness through the character Lieutenant Mamiya. Mamiya witnesses and suffers intolerable cruelty in the war. It leaves him emptied of personhood. He continues to exist for decades after, but he is profoundly effectless, seeing little point in living and little difference in it from dying. In the last days, however, he has a chance to talk about the war with a sympathetic listener. Making bundles of meaning out of these memories feels like purpose to him, and remembering what it feels like when there's a point to living makes it easier, or rather more fitting, for him to die. In telling their stories, the Chukarin were seeking not so much a chance for a meaningful life as a chance for a life that wasn't finally meaningless. Avoiding meaninglessness meant, for most, achieving a sense of coherence. That is, conceptualizing their lives as tellable and purposeful stories, moving out of the isolation of incommunicable memory into the, I cannot say this word, into the reciprocity of shared narrative. There had to be a way to make comprehensible stories out of their incomprehensible evils. Their lives had to be more than a pointless intersecting series of events to no purpose. If experiencing the events of our lives as causeless, as essentially non-narrative in form, it is basic, existential human trauma, then creating a personal history that can be shared with another in basic forms of rescue. To do so is to imagine the life arc as a linear narration, as a series of events with causes, with joys that are not accidental and suffering that is not reasonless. And to be the author of such a linear narration is to control events that were once frighteningly out of control. For the men I met, there were many paths to coherence and meaning. For some, it was an apology. I am without argument truly wrong, and I know this. I am sorry. There's nothing I could say but that, Sakakura-san said. But telling these stories, I seek atonement, he said. For others, it was grieving, a use of narrative to give enclosing shape to otherwise open wound of melancholia. For still others, it was intervention. It was warning. This is what you are becoming, perhaps have already become. It mattered to the veterans that I was a U.S. writer. Americans, they believed, must not be allowed to continue averting their gaze from the filthy details of their wars. And for most of them, it was pro-communism, anti-militarism, and anti-imperialism. As Kubotera-san said, re-education in communist prison camps had helped them to see how they had become devils. It therefore also revived them as human beings. Now, their lives had a clear mission. Their end days had purpose. He said, we should come together now and ask today's young people never to repeat our mistakes, Koyama-san said. We must say this consistently until we die. But there is also a remainder, something unshareable that endures. This exchange between my interpreter and another veteran, Kaneko-san, is typical. Hold on. Okay, sorry, my foot's falling asleep. Okay, Kaneko-san, make sure the professor understands. Interpreter, right, I'll make sure to tell them. Kaneko-san, please do. I say it everywhere I go. Anything and everything is pinned on us soldiers. What's being worshipped at Yasukuni, which is a shrine to the war dead, it's just a bunch of names on a paper. That's what's left there. Where do you think the remains are? The bones? In the Siberian dirt, in Chinese dirt, in the southern islands. There, everybody's still buried in the ocean. The bones? Isn't that right? The dead? We saw the bodies. It was wretched. Interpreter, you've been Kaneko-san. Please, I'm counting on you. Interpreter, I'm counting on you to repeat it. Kaneko-san, do you think they understood? Interpreter, right, no problem. Kaneko-san, do you think they understand? Interpreter, I just said it all properly. So, like, I talked about the Yasukuni before. The Yasukuni is a shrine in Japan that some of the top heads of government visit every year to pay homage to the war dead. Not the war dead as in people that were lost and killed by Japanese war criminals, but as the Japanese war criminals themselves. And that, folks, is why China and Korea get so freaking infuriated every year, is because you have the Prime Minister of Japan sending flowers to pay, respects to people who killed and raped 80,000 women in Nanjing. That would piss me the F off if I was China. I'm just saying. Kathy Caruth has argued that the problem of putting trauma into words isn't so much a problem of description as it is a problem of experience. In trauma, she writes, the greatest confrontation with reality may also occur as an absolute numbing to it. Trauma represents an impossibility in language because it is primarily an assault on meaning rather than a kind of meaning. There is no final understanding. There is no transcendence. There are only momentary stays against confusion. I'm glad you are, Laninia. Yeah, we haven't even gotten to the interviews yet, guys. We have not even gotten to the interviews yet. It's just the way that this guy is like describing it makes you think like, why am I even reading this book? I feel bad. Like he makes you guess like why we are into the things we're in. I try not to sound frustrated when I whispered to her, you can stop writing, please. Ask what it felt like the first time. The man I'm interviewing, Kaneko-san, has recently returned from the hospital for intestinal blockage. He is 88 years old. The skin hangs from his arm like draping sheets. He is getting tired and will want to stop before we're finished. I know it. We do not have much time. My interpreter is writing down a shorthand outline of every answer the man gives as he gives it. Sometimes after he has finished speaking, I wait a full minute or two while she continues to write. Please stop writing, I tell her. Let's just move to the next question. I don't need the outline. We will translate it all later. Her head twitches, and her eyes dart back and forth between me and the man, and she's still writing, jerkily. Wait, she says. I'm almost done. She's not a professional. She volunteered to do this for free. The photographer and I truly had to force money on her. She's a graduate student. She cares about the project, feels some personal connection to it. The work is stressing her out. Hi, Cherry. What was it like the first time you raped someone? How did you feel? Kaneko-san. There isn't really a feeling for that, you know. It was just, I want to try that out. That's all. How much goosebumps does that give you? Having to ask somebody, how did it feel the first time you raped someone? And they just wanted to try it out. I'm trying to skip all of like the story and get to like what. I don't know what's it. Okay, I'm gonna skip the story. They're going out for drinks or whatever. I'm good. How are you, Jane? The problem of being okay, so now they're talking about translation or whatever. The problem of being lost in translation carried over into the transcription of testimony. I hired secondary interpreters to double check all the work of my primary interpreters. They didn't always agree. One insisted another was translating too formally, like a prude. For instance, she wanted to change I was mad to. I got pissed off. No, the jerk at NHK didn't air me. No, the frickin' NHK didn't air me. And there was none of that, of course, just things like, come on, pick up the pace, you bum, to hell no fucking way. Sure, well, we said things like, come on, pick up the pace, you asshole. So now they're arguing about how they're translating the stuff. Another insisted the language of the men was just too old-fashioned, hard to understand both on tape and on page. Also, two of their interpreters I hired quit. In both cases, they interviewed successfully and I gave them materials to work on. They began their work, and then I didn't hear from them again for a long time, despite repeated attempts. Reattempted. I made a new word. Repeat attempts. To contact them. They finally admitted they had quit, indicating symptoms of depression. One of them got in trouble with family members when they discovered what the work was about. In that case, an error of judgment only a college professor could make. I had prepaid for several months' worth of work. I couldn't bring myself to ask for it back. When the photographer organized our travel, he made sure we had Japanese we had a Japanese fixer to structure professional and institutional interactions. Photographers know how to do such things. Okay, so now we're jumping onto a story. This is a story that I think Kaneko is telling. So those comfort stations cost money, right? And rape doesn't cost a penny, right? We didn't have money, so we didn't really go to the comfort stations. And since rape is free, so when we went to the front, we definitely did rape. How many did you do? This sort of thing. I did 2, or I did 3. With this, to a sort of competitive mood would spring up. But one thing I can say that one time, all sorts of, it's a disgusting story. Though whether pregnant women felt good or not, I'd hear that sort of thing. And we'd actually go and search out women who looked like they were pregnant. That sort of thing happened. And then after we'd done her, we wouldn't kill her. Yeah, sometimes we'd kill her. However, if she resisted, we would kill her. 3, 5, 6 soldiers would come together, drag out a woman, pin her hands and legs down, and again spread them out, then shove a rod inside, shove in a rod, and then we'd kill her. That sort of thing happened. And the people over there, the women, they thought they'd be raped by Japanese soldiers, troops, right? And in the kitchens over there, they'd have these large stoves, and in these stoves, black ash. They would rub it on their faces like this. And when they did that, they thought Japanese soldiers wouldn't rape them. So they rubbed it on their faces like this. But we thought, these idiots, these kinds of things, we're going to do it anyways. And we raped them. We went and did it anyway because it just didn't matter. However, then the women thought of a different strategy. What do you think they thought of? And then the writer says, what, I wonder? And Kaneko says, feces. They would take feces, right, and rub it here. And sure enough, we didn't go after them like that. And so we'd go to a place, to a village, right, and they'd take crap, maybe kids' crap, and rub it all over themselves. It really smelled awful, and we couldn't get close. And then we thought, this bitch mocking us, and then beat her. We'd look for another woman, as to be expected. So they would go looking, they would think of, like, they would make games and talk about what was the best women to rape. And the women would try to make themselves unappeasing to the Japanese soldiers so they wouldn't get raped. Hold on one second. Hey, you guys be good in there. Okay. Okay, so now we're going right back to the story. My interpreter is the buffer between me and the men, but one, I think, that makes them feel safe, less directly challenged, more willingly to open up. Sometimes when the men are talking, my interpreter doesn't translate, so I sit and listen with open, passive attention, as if to music. My mind wanders sometimes. I listen to the sound of the monk chanting in the next room. I think about I think about what I'm going to do with this material. I wonder why I'm here. Responsibility or curiosity. I feel horrible that I can't stay focused on the moment, that I'm thinking about how to write about this, that I'm thinking of the material at all. The photographer is like a natural force when he works, entirely present, radiating concentration. The interpreter kneels before each interviewee, tight-wired with focus, but at the same time deferential, gentle, eyes wide. She knows why she is here. I watch her. When the interviews start, the men don't look at her when they're answering questions. They look at me and the photographer. They think we can do something. More than one has said that they are counting on us. They have told their stories before in Japan, but only so many are willing to listen. They believe we can get their message out more effectively to the rest of the world. When we first arrived in Tokyo, we were taken on an off-hours tour of a local peace museum by staff. At the end, they asked us to use the power in the media to help them resist censorship pressures from the local government and the nationalists. I was too embarrassed to be honest and to admit that it was preposterous to think I could do something. But I also couldn't bring myself to lie to them outright and say I wouldn't help. So I repeated their request and earnestly affirmed their need, a cowardly move, because I knew they would interpret my response wrongly as an implicit promise that I would do something. Why else would I be there? This is a question for Mr. Dawes. You've talked to me about this this many things so honestly. What he's wondering is how you feel talking about things like a rape to someone like me, a woman of the younger generation. Okay, hold on. I'm confused. You've talked to me about this. Many things. So honestly, what he's wondering is how you feel. Okay, so this is Kaneko again. This is okay. Now we're going to the soldier interview. I hated it at first. The conversations get dirty, but if I don't talk about it, people wouldn't know how the position of women was really miserable, you know? If I just say the words comfort women, nobody would understand it. They would just think of you only got men and money. They would just think of those women did it for the men for the money. You wouldn't know the reality, right? If they don't know the story behind, they wouldn't understand what it was like inside comfort stations. That's why I talk about it. I hated it at first. Yeah, of course. Even our buddies, if they get asked about things like, did you go to a comfort station? They would hem and haw around saying, well, did you rape anybody? And we'd say, well, rape. Well, I heard that they certainly did that. They dodged the question. Everybody was like that at the beginning. It's only recently everybody has started talking about it. Things started changing little by little, you know. At the beginning, even I hated it. But because this was something I had to do, I had to talk about it. When there's a war, the ones who cry the most are women. Their husbands, the fathers of their children are dragged into the army. And basically, if the husbands die, what do you think happens? They live hand to mouth crying, right? And then eventually they end up turning into comfort women. How are they supposed to make a living with their kids? It's the same as with, and then the interpreter says it's unclear what he says. As long as you have things, you can sell them. After your skin, everything, all that's left is your body. At the end, you know, so eventually they sell their body, making money and get by. It is the women who suffer the most. And so everywhere I go, I always say, women should be the ones who oppose war the most. It's our responsibility to do this sort of thing. That is something we don't want to bring up on young people again, that our conviction. That's why I'm telling the story to you up front. I hated it at first. My wife, too. Everybody hated it. My kids hated it, you know? My kids said, Dad, don't bullshit. Everybody was like that. See? The issue with comfort women, everybody, wives, didn't like it. Wives wouldn't even say, divorce me. They would say, you know, and that's why they didn't talk about it. But I had to. Everybody. One second. Okay. Whew, we're almost on to the next person. Oh, my mouth is getting dry. Is there a dominant image or model for helping us think about war criminals today? It is likely to be found in the Nazi bureaucratic Adolf Eichmann, who played a major organizational role in the deportation of European Jews to extermination centers. Eichmann, as an example, offers a way of seeing. He is a type, so to speak, that prepares us to understand other types of his sort, types we otherwise can't or don't want to understand. During the Iraq War, for instance, Eichmann was the shadow behind Lynn. We're back. Oh, where was I? We're in the 20s. Linda England, who tortured and abused prisoners at Abu Ghraib prison in Baghdad, evil as representing these figures is thoughtless, in both sense of the word, not only unthinking of others, but also incapable of thinking. Eichmann, Hannah Arendt explains, was most notable not for diabolic villainy, but for his remoteness from reality, a remoteness identifiable through the symptoms of his language. He spoke in cliches, used stock phrases, seldom varied his words. The longer one listened to him, Ardent writes, the more obvious it became that his inability to speak was closely connected with his inability to think, namely, to think from the standpoint of somebody else. No communication was possible with him. not because he lied, but because he was surrounded by the most reliable of all safeguards against the words and the presence of others, and hence against the reality as such. Eichmann insisted Art simply never realized what he was doing. This is what evil looks like. It is unimaginable, unimaginative, banal. It is Lindy England who have constructed in our media. It is Lindy England of Judith Thompson's play Palace of the End, who delivers monologues composed of language used before. Cliches, snippets of song, advertising jingles, movie lines, prepackaged language as a safeguard against thought. There were moments in my conversations with these veterans when I felt them retreating behind the protection of packaged narratives. Over the years, they had found a way to describe to themselves what they had done. Stories they had told over and over again. Stories with beginnings and endings and involuntary memorized phrases. At one point, I became frustrated with this. The stories were honest, but they felt like a barrier, a defense against the possibility of engaging sincerely in the moment. When Kaneko-san started doing this in one of our conversations, I asked him what I thought would be an unexpected question, something that would force him to think past the protective, rote narrative. He was an old man, very traditional. It was easy to surprise him. He was not used to being asked about his feelings. People just wanted to hear about his crimes. Did you ever tell your mother? I asked him. The conversation stumbled when I asked this. He wasn't ready for it. He became agitated. My interpreter had to ask the question twice to explain the shift in conversational gears. Kaneko-san explained that his mother died shortly after he came home. In fact, he believed she had wanted for him to return before she died. When I came back home, Kaneko-san said, my mom made me dinner. Do you know one of my favorites, azuki? Sort of a in the face. She stared me firmly in the face. She touched my leg. At this point in the conversation, Kaneko starts to cry. My interpreter turns to me and whispers, in Japan, we believe ghosts don't have legs. If you fear somebody is a ghost, you touch their legs. Kaneko-san lived alone with his wife until 2009, when they built a duplex to live in with his older daughter's family. 1 year later, on November 25th, 2010, he passed away. He was born in Urayasu in 1920 and went to Jinjo Elementary School before being drafted. He worked at a scrap iron company in Tokyo. Yeah, I know. Oh, man, we've been going for an hour. 1 second. 1 second. 1 second. Sorry, I was expecting a package. Okay, so I was a little ambitious when I said we were going to do 50 pages today. We got to page 23. I thought it would go like fast, but like having a shift so you guys understand. I mean, I can read, I can do a stream. No problem, because reading, it's like I can keep going. Like I'm gonna have to go with my so I can save the page and we can read again soon. Probably Friday. If you guys want to. Friday, we can read again. I would keep reading, but my kids are going crazy. I was like, go in the bedroom, do not come out. So what do you guys think so far? I like that we got the little bit of the interview that we got with one of the war criminals was intense. But I like how the author made us think of like, why he was doing the project and why we wanted to listen and what good it would do and how we could take this information and make it something that's like ethically and morally right. Oh, Carl, yeah. I'd love to go to work. I still haven't found a job. I'm waiting for the place to call me. I need to make money. I need to make money. Yeah, I'll read again on Friday on the same time. I think that would be fun. And also, we'll be reading a fun book tomorrow. You're welcome, Valley Girl. If you haven't joined my Discord or whatever, you can do all of that stuff here. Discord, donation links, socials, all there. Donations appreciated but not expected. But yeah, this is a good book. So if we could read 20 pages, it'll probably take us a little bit. I'm glad everyone liked it. I didn't put any makeup on today, so I had to put the dress on. My chat's just catching up. The actual YouTube chat's way better than the streaming chat. Oh, I'm so tired. Yeah, I think like the further we go into this book, it's gonna get harder to read. I cried twice already while reading this book. It's the best dress in the world. I hate sparkling water, but I love mineral water. I don't understand this. This stuff is the best. So tomorrow we're going to be reading, just for fun, this interesting book called I don't want to say the name of it during the stream, but we found some very interesting erotic novels that we're going to kind of page through that I found on Amazon. That's going to be tomorrow. I think, what time did we put that at? Later? I'd have to look. Let me see. Oh, thank you, Cherry. Open. What time is that tomorrow? You think I would know? Tomorrow, tomorrow's stream will be very lighthearted and we'll like laugh and make jokes and interact more. That's at 4:30, so it's an hour and a half more longer than what we went. Well, an hour and a half after when we started today. So that'll be fun. 5:30 for you, 4:30 for me, I think. Bing. Well, anyways, thank you so much for coming, everybody. It was fun reading. See you tomorrow, Valley Girl, everyone. Oh my god, I'm exhausted for just reading that. And the link to the book, if you go in the description, the link to buy the book is there. And then like all my socials and whatever is there as well. So yeah. I am glad everyone came. You guys all have a good night. I might be around. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, a great story, Ray J. It's going to be a great story. Something to put like the direct internet in it. So, see you guys next time. Love. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Write in the comments what you guys thought of the book, or if you have questions or any thoughts, comment.